In this short video, we're going to consider how the initial seizures from the scene of the shooting on the 9th of March 2009 allowed the investigating officers to reach a conclusion about where the shot that killed Constable Stephen Carroll had been fired from. You will remember the lip of grass at the rear of Lismore Manor. Some of the key evidential seizures occurred from precisely that area. We're going to consider what was found on that area of grass, and also what was recovered from Stephen Carroll's vehicle, the vehicle that he drove to number 33 Lismore Manor, where some of the most important evidential findings were made. This is an extract from a witness statement of one of the investigating officers. And he is a senior scientific officer at the Forensic Service of Northern Ireland. On the 11th of March 2009, he receives a number of items from scene officers or exhibit officers in the case. So scene officers or exhibit officers collate potentially relevant exhibits and are in charge of ensuring that they reach the forensic examiner in a particular case without having their integrity reduced in any way. They have to maintain what's called continuity for the exhibits, so that when lawyers come to review the paperwork associated with those exhibits, they can trace exactly who handled each exhibit and when. The idea being that there is a continuity of accountability with respect to the movement of those items. So some of the important exhibits are listed on this page. The first two important items are LH7 and LH9, which are both empty shell casings seized from the grass area at the rear of Lismore Manor. Two empty bullet casings from the grass area at the rear of Lismore Manor. The third significant item mentioned in this witness statement is a copper jacket from the rear driver footwell of the vehicle being driven by PC Stephen Carroll. And here is the registration number for that vehicle. Further bullet fragments were recovered from the dashboard of the same vehicle. Item JB1 was a long-barreled weapon wrapped in plastic and tape. This item was not seized from either the grass area behind Lismore Manor or the vehicle in which Stephen Carroll was shot. And we see that these items were handed over to the FSNI some days after the first batch of items were handed over. But this exhibit JB1 was the firearm that was used to shoot PC Carroll. And we'll come on to look at how that weapon was found in the course of a subsequent video. You can see that other items were seized from the vehicle. There was one small fragment of metal lodged in the plastic of the headrest, and other miscellaneous items. And the officer also produced, the exhibits officer produced a working copy of a map of Lismore Manor for the sake of establishing where the shot had been fired from. Now, this forensic examiner attends the scene at Lismore Manor on the 16th of April 2009 in order to determine the possible shooter locations. He then attends another location, which I've redacted, in order to examine a PSNI vehicle, being the PSNI vehicle that Stephen Carroll was shot in, that he was driving at the time of the shooting, in order to determine whether or not any other material of evidential significance was recoverable. And the forensic examiner concludes that there was no further material that was worthy of recovery. He goes on to consider the nature of the items that he's received from the exhibit officers. He identifies that LH7 and LH9 both bore a head stamp reading NNY 1982. This tells the forensic examiner that the cartridge was of Yugoslavian origin and had been manufactured in 1982. You'll see that there was some discrepancy in that, that could be a typographical error, because he indicates that LH9 was manufactured in 1992. But I think because there is no difference in the head stamp between the two cartridges, that it's likely that that is merely a typographical error and that both cartridges were manufactured in 1982. LH7 and LH9 were microscopically compared and found to have been discharged from the same firearm. LH7 and LH9 were microscopically compared to test firings from JB1. Remember, that's the assault rifle that was used or recovered from elsewhere. And it was found that LH7 and LH9 had been discharged from the AK-47 assault rifle. The copper jacket was further tested, and it was found that it had consistent rifling with the rifling in the AK-47 assault rifle. So the conclusion that this officer draws about these particular items, and significantly for our purposes LH7 and LH9, is that both LH7 and LH9 were cartridges fired by the weapon known as JB1, which was an assault rifle. The forensic officer concludes that the recovery of two spent 7.62 by 39mm caliber cartridge cases and associated bullet fragments indicates that the AK-47 assault rifle discharged at least two cartridges, and that the most likely shooter position, considering all the available information, was at the path between the lamppost and the corner of the closest building. Is at the path between the lamppost and the corner of the closest building. And that is precisely the path that we looked at in the course of our first video. The officer continues and says that from the map, the approximate range of the shooting was 50 meters. So the shot was taken by JB1, the assault rifle, which we'll come to consider in a moment. It discharged the two cartridges, LH7 and LH9. Both of those cartridges were manufactured in Yugoslavia in 1982. The other bullet fragments and fragments of metal found at the scene were consistent with having been fired by JB1. And because of the finding, the location that the items were found in, the officer concludes that the most likely shooter location was on the path between the lamppost and the corner of the closest building. If we remember back to the first video, we know that the path was some meters away from the front of number 33 Lismore Manor. Yet the work of the forensic officer in this case situates the shooter at some point on that path between Lismore Manor and Drumbeg, at a distance of around 50 meters. In the next video, we're going to move on to some of the more detailed evidential considerations and what initially tied Brendan McConville to this case. Thanks very much.